for me, working on the anti-FGM campaign, my experience has been quite interesting. So if we look at the positives, for example, it meant by sharing the stories of survivors, for example, it meant we can bring some change into policies and legislations. In terms of negativity, there's always a backlash, especially from the practicing communities. And my experience has been, if you're a woman who speaks out against something that's culturally practiced to control women, and if you're a woman who speaks out against it, you are seen as a traitor or someone who should not be speaking about this. So there is a backlash from the practicing community itself. So really that's been my experience in working with this campaign. However, I think the way I deal with it now, it's focusing on the positives instead of the two negatives that you might hear. And as human beings, it's quite natural that we always focus on the negative aspects. So I kind of have to trick myself into listening to the positive thoughts instead of the negative thoughts. So that's really been my experience. But for me, the survivors speaking out, their stories really, it's what has made the change into this campaign. Because I think you can talk about FGM all day, every day, but when you actually hear the living proof of someone who's lived it, I think it makes a big difference. I worked on many cases, but one case that always stands out for me, it was an assessment that I did a couple of years ago. As a therapist, that's what we do before we see any clients. It was a woman who not only did she undergo FGM, but she's undergone another practice called breast ironing. It's similar to mutilation, it's mutilating the breast, so basically breaking down the tissues of the breast. And I remember that was one of the worst days of being at work. I remember walking out thinking, this is an evil world, because that woman was a victim of her own sexuality. Both two organs that define her as a woman was taken away from her because society sees it as a threat. So that was a difficult case I worked with. I mean, it took me a while, even for me, to kind of deal with what I was seeing. And funnily enough, she was one of the most positive people I've ever met. So that was one particular case that always stands out for me. But if I share a positive, much more positive case I worked on, this was a woman who came here as a child. By then she has already undergone the practice, but she mentioned it to her school teachers, but the school teachers didn't pick up on it. So it wasn't just her, it was also her sisters. And by the time, obviously, she became my client, she was very resentful towards the system that did not pick up on what happened to her. But there were other issues as well, child protection issues that the school didn't pick up on. But what this woman has done to that experience, by having her own children, by being in therapy, she learned how to cope by being let down by family members, by the system that was supposed to protect her. And I think the hard work me and her had to do in therapy was learning how to trust again. She had to learn how to trust human beings again. And I worked with her for about 1.5 years. And from what I hear, she's doing very well. You know, she's gone back to work. She's involved in the women's rights movement, from what I've been told, because, you know, obviously I don't follow on what happens after, but I do hear through the grapevine. It's a very small community, so you do know what the women are up to. So it's amazing to see when you do that work and then something really positive comes out of it. Listen, every day when I come out from my house, I tell myself one thing. If I can help one girl today, it's worth it. Yeah. Whether it's having small information or sending her to the right clinic. So I don't walk out thinking, I need to save millions of girls. No, if it's just one, I've done my job. One thing I've learned through this work, it's, as a society, we don't know our own basic human rights. We just don't know it. We are not taught it. Schools don't teach us about basic human rights. I've always said algebra did not help me how to deal with relationships. You know, I said maybe I could have avoided some dodgy boyfriends if actually I had something like that in school. So for me, this is not just FGM, it's bigger than that. Yeah. It's a bigger system. This is about policing women's bodies. And if we were taught in school from a very young age that we owned our bodies, this is our body, we do what we want with it, who knows? A lot of us might have told somebody about FGM at a very early stage. But because we were groomed into this idea that someone owns our body, then we thought it was acceptable. The reason people practice this type of violence, people give you many reasons. They would say it's religious, it's cultural practice, it's a rite of passage, it's to maintain virginity, and that's not true. FGM does not maintain someone's virginity. Girls are having sex outside of marriages, outside of, the so-called norm family system. So it looks clean, it looks beautiful, people tell you different reasons, but really fundamentally, the reason FGM is practiced is to control women's sexuality, so that's why FGM is practiced. So this idea of women are not supposed to have sexual pleasure is the reason why FGM is being put in place. I recently found out in the UK, being a lesbian, it wasn't actually against a crime. Being gay, you could have been prosecuted for it. But there was a reason, apparently, why being a lesbian wasn't a crime, because Queen Victoria at the time said the thought of a woman having sexual pleasure just did not exist. People couldn't believe a woman would have such needs. So this, again, it's wider, this idea of controlling women's sexuality. And fundamentally, that's why FGM happens, is to control the woman and the girl's sexuality. Those of us who survived, our experiences can vary. Some of us, some of us got the right help that we needed, whether it's from a health professional, from the mental health professionals, then you will find a way to live with FGM. Because one thing I've learned as a survivor, you can't get rid of it. It's something you're going to wake up with every morning, live with every day. And the moment you think you're going to get rid of it, then you're just going to set yourself up to fail. So for survivors, I would urge, if you are someone who's undergone this practice, to get help. Go to your family doctor, ask for other services that can support you, especially the psychological effects are the area that's still not dealt with. Women can have the defibrillation operation done where they can reopen the wound, but the scar, the psychological and the emotional scar, it's totally different. And for me, that's why at the Dahlia Project, the therapy service that we run really is to deal with that. So I would say to any survivor out there, please get help. Services do exist, it's just accessing them. And if they don't access, then you contact us and we'll find a way to make sure that you do have those services in place. For me, the biggest problem in addressing this form of violence has been the lack of political will. Because I think politicians play a great role in making sure this message, it's out there, the education and the awareness is actually out there. And for me as a campaigner, my biggest struggle was making sure the government takes this very seriously. But there's the flip side to this, which is the grassroots community who also need this type of information out there. But like I said earlier, when you're a woman who grew up in the West, so that's a challenge itself. So the moment you meet people, it's like, wow, you're the girl who grew up in the West. What do you know about girls back home? So that's a challenge itself all the time. So for me, challenges present at different levels, at political level, at grassroots level. But for me, it all comes back to prevention and education. Because at the end of the day, as a survivor, as an expert who works in this field, I don't want to see girls being cut anymore. I really don't. Because you can prosecute people, you can arrest people, scare people if you wish. But once a girl is cut, she's cut. There's nothing you can do. There's no way of returning from this. One of the other difficulties in this campaign, in this work, especially in the UK, has been the legislation, the FGM Act. One of the biggest loopholes in the FGM Act, the child is expected to come and give evidence against their own parents. And what child out there in the world is going to come to a courtroom and give evidence against their own parents? That's never going to happen. So if until that changes, we're gonna be, we would never see a prosecution in this country. It just won't happen. Oh, my work. Oh my God, I'm known as the big mouth with the vagina cupcakes. That's just me. I'm known for being the girl who says vagina in the middle of the room. Because, Britain's still very conservative. Nobody wants to say vagina still. So we have a big problem. We've got a long way to go. I think for me, I don't want to... I did my bit in this campaign, but there's the reason in the UK the campaign had the success that it did, because we came together. It wasn't an individual situation. So I brought my voice, another organisation brought their voice, another government board brought their voice. We had the survivors speaking out. So I think, my voice was using the right language. For me, using the right language is really, really important. And I think I took the advantage of being a survivor. So I kind of took the fact that I'm mutilated. I'm going to say whatever I want. You don't know what I've been through. I've been mutilated. So I took that privilege by saying, I remember I started campaigning 13 years ago. I remember 12 years ago, I would say now, where I said, this is not, why are we using the word religion and culture? This is child abuse. The gasp in the room. It was like, you can't say that. And I said, but that's what it is. It's child abuse. This is one of the worst forms of violence against women and girls. It's a form of sexual abuse. And people always say, why is this sexual abuse? And I said, well, if I went and grabbed a child from the middle of the street, pinned them to a table, touched their genitals, I'll be on a sex offenders list. I will be on that list. So why is that any different than this? So again, going back to challenge actually, the challenge has been FGM has been treated as an other. It shouldn't be treated as an other. FGM is violence and full stop. I hope at some point we can get rid of all those labels. So next time someone speaks to me, it will be, you've been violated. How have you been violated? Oh, my genitals have been cut into pieces. It shouldn't be certain definitions and treated as other. It shouldn't be treated. It should be part of the agenda of violence against women and girls, and that's how it should be treated. But the moment you make it into an other, then it becomes its own thing, and it doesn't work. I believe FGM will end because, number one, I feel globally, because of social media really plays a big role in how we communicate. I think social media will play a big role on why FGM actually ends, because I think we are sharing information for once. For example, now there's a campaign that kicked off in India. A lot of people not associate FGM with India. And for me, by having that type of dialogue globally, we will come to that stop where FGM will end within a generation. I truly believe it will, but it needs to come at all levels. Especially, we need a stronger political level. But in order for that to happen, we need our politicians to take women's issues seriously. Until that happens, FGM will fall right at the bottom of this situation because, it's very difficult, when we live in a society where we are taxing tampons, for example. So if I've been taxed for having periods, how do I tackle FGM? I really struggle with that. So until we have a system in place where there's respect for women and women's rights, not just FGM will end, all forms of violence and oppression against women will end. So we need to go back to the root of the problem and deal with that. And for me, a lot of people always think, why does she bring up tampon taxing? And I said, that is one of the biggest discrimination acts against women. The fact that our period has become a luxury. I did not choose to bleed for 5 days and have cramps. I didn't choose to do that. So the fact that I have to pay tax for it, it's so offensive. So it's like, how do I even talk to you about something else? Because you're taxing me for being a woman. So for me, until we go to the root of the problem, start with the root and then work our way up. So until we have world leaders, decision makers who actually have respect for women in general, because this all stems back from not having respect for women. This is misogynistic behaviour towards women, and it all stems from not respecting women. So for me, until attitudes need to change before FGM ends, but I do believe it will end because I can see how this movement the global movement that's, building around us at the moment. So I feel public outrage gets us best results.